Morning everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of On the Whistle, where we're going to chat through Sunderland 2, Plymouth Argyle 2. Not very often this season. In fact, I'm really struggling to think of one off the top of my head where we've had to sit and do this and talk through what was a really disappointing performance as well as result. Now, of course, Sunderland have had some really frustrating results and some not so great performances over the course of the season. But I felt like this, for many people, certainly my feeling after the game, was that this was one of the most disappointing results of the season, really, given what an opportunity it was. We obviously had a little bit of a chat, myself and James, from the press box. You can see that instant reaction video on our YouTube channel as well if you want to go back and have a look at that. So I don't want to dwell too much on the game, but I thought it was a really disappointing performance from Sunderland right through the entirety of the game, really. Initially, as I discussed on our reaction video, my initial feeling was that Sunderland had got the setup wrong. Lots of you asked about the team selection and the way Sunderland approached the game, so I'm going to discuss that in quite a bit of depth later, because that was the kind of dominant thing you were all sort of talking about and asking about after the game. My initial feeling was that it was unnecessarily conservative against a Plymouth team who I think were always going to sit deep and defend in quite a low block. I felt like we've talked a lot over the last couple of years about a lot of us wanting Dan Neil to play further forward, where he could sort of wrap passes into the box, where he can show what he's all about in the final third, where he's got that little bit of X factor as a really creative passing player. The irony is I felt like this was one of the games where you would have been very happy with Dan Neil in that deep line role, because he can play these big switches of play, he can quicken things up, he can take the ball off the centre half and try something quite aggressive, which is what I think the game called for. And so I think that Sunderland sort of laboured through the first half, albeit I thought we saw again, flashes of what Enzo Lefebvre can offer. I thought most of Sunderland's good play in the first half came through him, got into some great areas. I think he's unbelievably unlucky not to have an assist yet in his 3 appearances. I think the quality of some of the balls he's put in the box have been top draw. And of course, that controversial Isidore goal that was ruled out at Derby would have been an assist. So I think there is a positive there. The strange thing is, though, is that for all that I felt that Sunderland's setup was wrong in the first half, when they equalised and made it 1-1 in the second half and Lebris made the substitution that I think we were all thinking about, which was to get Miendo and go for 4-4-2, I actually thought Sunderland got considerably worse after that. We do definitely have to give some credit to Plymouth Argyle. I think for their performance in the first half, they were defensively disciplined, they were structured. I thought their play in possession was very, very limited, to be honest. In the first half, that is, I thought it was very much play long balls, get the ball away from dangerous areas and hope for the best. I think, to be fair, you have to give them some credit. In the second half, it wasn't like that at all. I think they sensed an opportunity in the second half, they grew in confidence. And I thought they actually had quite a good counter-attacking strategy in the second half. I thought Barley Mumba was really, really good, arguably the man of the match across the 90 minutes, actually. Thought he produced a really strong performance. First half defensively, second half I actually thought he drove into some nice areas. I thought their right winger, Mustafa Bundu, I thought he got into some really good areas before he went off as well. So we do have to give some credit to Plymouth. They got a reaction from what happened in midweek. Credit to their manager for that. It's quite interesting speaking to him after the game. Actually, he said that because of Storm when they'd actually travelled up a day before than they would normally have done, they would have travelled up on the Friday, but instead they said it on the Thursday. Muslich has some connections who know Paul Mitchell, the sporting director at Newcastle, and they basically spent 2 days in a mini camp at Newcastle's training ground, doing a lot of tactical work, a lot of video analysis, but also just giving the head coach the time to spend some time with his players, which I think after what happened in midweek when they lost 5-0 to Burnley, I think it really helped. So there was something probably a little bit unfortunate in circumstances conspired against them there for Plymouth to produce a much better performance than we'd expected. And for all, so I thought something got worse after they went 4-4-2. I thought the game was way too open. I thought Plymouth looked the better team in that phase. I thought Sunderland was slightly fortunate to get ahead. Obviously, great finish from Trey Hume, but Sunderland get ahead from a set-piece goal. Lebris goes back to a 4-3-3. Doesn't really help. He puts on another defender. Doesn't really help. And by the end, I thought that Plymouth absolutely deserved their equaliser. They could maybe even make an argument that they deserved to win the game on the balance of chances. So that was an interesting one for me, in that it sort of leads me to think that while I didn't agree with the way the team set up, I'm not sure it was necessarily purely a formation and tactics thing, because I think no matter what formation Sunderland played at any stage during the game, I don't think they were anywhere near their best. I think it was just a case of them lacking their usual intensity, lacking their usual quality on the ball for sure. I thought some of the passing, especially in the first half, was so sloppy. So what are the reasons for that? You would hope it wasn't complacency. You would hope that it's not underestimating Plymouth. Was a little bit fatigued at the end of a week in which they played 2 away games. Possibly that was a factor for sure, although I think Plymouth would argue, given the trip they had to make up to the North East, it's hard to really make that as an excuse for Sunderland. So, or was it just an off day? You know, there haven't been too many this season where the players just couldn't get, for whatever reason, to the level we've seen from them. It's really, really hard to know for sure. But I do fear that this is going to be an afternoon that we look back on the end of the season, certainly in terms of the top 2, and say it was really, really pivotal. Listen, it's still all to play for, so many points still to play. Sunderland have still got to play a lot of the teams around them that they can take points off. So there's no need for doom and gloom on that front. Sunderland is still very much in the race for the top 2, but I do also think there's a reality that, you know, the teams, especially the parachute payment teams, they're not going to drop that many points. And I think with Sheffield United losing at home to Hull on Friday night, with Burnley and Leeds playing tomorrow, so one or both of those teams will drop points. I think, given where Plymouth are on the table, this was an absolutely massive opportunity for Sunderland. And I think it's one they'll know that they had to do a bit more with, and they had to get the 3 points from. So we know Sunderland kept them going on a run. I don't want to be overly negative about it, but it did feel like a massive 2 points dropped in the context of the season. And I think a lot of the decisions that Sunderland made didn't work out, which is really disappointing because, as I said, it's not really something we've talked about too much this season. Excuse me, for the last minute I've been waiting to cough, so I'm going to do it now before I go into your questions. So just turn the sound off for 10 seconds maybe. My apologies. So, as you can imagine, so many of the questions in the comments across both Blue Sky and YouTube were all really along a very similar theme, which I totally understand. So I'm just going to read a raft of them out now, and then I'll just talk a little bit around some of the themes that come up. So Ross says, is this one on Labrice? Which I think, I'm assuming, Ross, that you're talking about the team selection. I think I'm fair to take that. Tom Shiny says, Regis totally got the formation wrong. Why did we need Samite in today? We just weren't brave enough, and the changes totally nullified Job, who never got into the game. Scott says, seemed the wrong day to start Samed, looked negative selection from the start. The tactics slowed everything down on a day we needed to look positive and get the ball forward quick. 2 up top would have shown real intent that we were going to have a go. Davey says, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but it looked very much like our staff had overthought Plymouth's reaction to their midweek drubbing. Seemed like we set up expecting a really hard game against the side adrift at the bottom. Getting Sally's minutes for future games seemed to totally disrupt the side. Mr. Smith says, what was RLB doing, experimenting with the squad? And yeah, it's a similar theme. Loads of questions over on YouTube about that decision to start with Samed. So we asked Labrice about his decision to play Samed after the game. As I've said at the start, you know, I thought I didn't think it was the right game for Samed to come into. I didn't feel it was a game in which Sunderland needed an orthodox defensive midfielder. You know, there is an irony in that. I think there have been plenty of games over the last couple of seasons where Sunderland have needed one and not had one. I didn't feel this was that game. Labrice, you know, basically what he said was the first thing, to be fair, that he said was, listen, when you look at the result and the way the game went, maybe it wasn't the best decision. He absolutely held his hands up to that. His argument is that we need a bigger squad. We need to have more players connected with the team. We need to have more players who we can trust to play games, to start games, to come off the bench and impact games. The squad has been too thin all season, and the only way to do that is to get them in the team. We have to find opportunities to play them. So that was his reason, and I think it's important as well that, you know, certainly from my perspective, one of the things I've been critical about all season is that, you know, the squad has been too thin. There haven't been enough options to change the game from the bench. Too often Sunderland have tired in games. And so I don't want to be overly hypocritical and criticise Labrice for trying to introduce a player who can potentially be a really important option in the weeks ahead. However, as I said, I just feel like it wasn't quite the right game. I agree with all the comments, really, that I think this was a game where actually Dan Neil in a more defensive midfield role would have actually served the team better. But Labrice did say that, you know, while he accepts that it wasn't a decision that worked out today, he still thinks it's something that can have a positive impact going forward because Samed's got more minutes under his belt. So it's one of those things. I don't think it was a decision that worked on the day, but hopefully Labrice's confidence that this will positively impact the team going forward will come true. The other thing I would say on that is as well is that I really did anticipate Roberts playing for Rigg. I did think that was the right decision. I thought Rigg had looked a little bit tired in the last couple of games. Player of his age, I didn't have any problem whatsoever with him sitting out this game. I didn't think it was a bad call. But the Samed one certainly took me by surprise, and let's see over the sort of coming weeks whether that one is justified. Craig says, my question would be, this is over on YouTube, thanks underneath our instant reaction video, so thanks Craig for sending that in. How does Samed fit into our centre midfield going forward? Neil and Job had poor games, and if that's our midfield three, then it worries me for the future matches. I do think, Craig, there'll be games where Samed's really useful. I think his positional discipline, his tackling. I think there'll be games where we look at that and think that's a really safe option. I think it's something that the squad's not really had for a long time. I really like that we've got that option. I do see that aspect of it as a positive. I thought that Job definitely wasn't at his best yesterday. Was that because the team around him wasn't at his best? Was it because Plymouth just didn't give him enough space and he thrives on slightly more open games where he can sort of really drive with the ball? Not sure exactly what the reason is. I do think it's going to take a little bit of time for Neil to get back to playing in that position. It's actually quite a long time since he's played as an 8 in a 4-3-3. I don't personally, Greg, I don't have any concerns about that aspect of it. I think he will sort of find his feet pretty quickly when he gets used to that role. So I do think there are scenarios where Samed plays Craig, and I think it would work, but I'm not sure yesterday was the day for that. Let's have a look at some of your other questions. So there was another fairly big theme, really, that came up, and that was about the late goals. So Andy over on Blue Sky says, we are currently at net -10, including the missed penalties at Burnley, for dropped points in the last 10 minutes this season. What do you put that down to? Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. A few of you over on YouTube are asking about the late goals habit as well. So here's another comment on YouTube. 36% of our goals conceded to be in the last 10 minutes. Nobody outplays us over 90 minutes, so why are we dropping off late in matches? Managers' instruction or getting edgy as a team, or both? It's a really difficult question that I don't have the answer to. I find the second goal yesterday quite a hard one to understand, because if you look at Sunderland's setup at that time, they've got 4 natural centre-halves on the pitch and Trey Hume as well, who's an excellent defender. It's quite hard to understand how those players should be able to deal with that passage of play, in my opinion. I think, it's a cross into the box, it's another cross into the box, the ball bounces around the box. I think Sunderland had the right personnel on the pitch to deal with that sort of approach and that passage of play, so it's quite a difficult one to understand how that happened. Really disappointing. I don't know exactly what is behind Sunderland's late goal issues, other than to say that it is a major issue. I had quite a strong opinion on this earlier in the season, which I think I probably talked about only on the whistle. I do think earlier in the season it was symptomatic of the fact that Sunderland's squad was far too small at the time. I felt that quite often we were seeing games, especially away from home, where Sunderland would have a lead, and then at the start of the second half, the opposition manager would just keep throwing players on. Every time you look up, there would be another 2 players emerging from the dugout to come on. Because of the way things were with injuries and what have you, Sunderland just didn't really have those options. And I felt that was a massive factor in why for a while they were conceding late goals. I felt they were just lacking freshness. I thought they were getting tired, and I thought the opposition was able to wrestle the momentum. It's harder to make that excuse now, because Sunderland are in a position where they have good players coming off the bench, as I mentioned. I know there was some criticism of Lebris putting on too many defenders yesterday and inviting pressure, and I understand that argument. At the same time, I think Lebris will say, well, look, what he put those players on was to deal with exactly what Plymouth did for the second goal. And it's hard to understand why it happens. So I do think it's something Lebris said he's really worried about and he's going to review. I don't feel that I have the answer as much as I did earlier in the season, where I definitely felt it was in part a fatigue thing. So it'll be interesting to see. I'll certainly something I'll ask about next time I see Lebris, when he's had a bit more time to think and reflect on that. But certainly the second goal yesterday, for all I thought Plymouth deserved it, it's one that Sunderland should be able to deal with. So that was really disappointing, and there's no 2 ways about it. It's a big Achilles heel for the Sunderland team at the moment. Another couple of questions kind of along a similar theme, but that I thought were really good questions. So Rob asked about Yelder coming on when Aushish and Poveda are on the bench, essentially arguing that it would have been better to bring on a sort of more positive sort of left-wing option, someone who could carry the ball, I think. I think I can understand a little bit with Poveda, who's obviously only had 45 minutes in the under-21s in midweek. He hasn't played any senior football since October, so I can understand a little bit of caution with that, and when the game was so finely poised, maybe it's one where if Sunderland were well ahead in the game, they would have looked to get 15-20 minutes. I do agree with you, Rob, that Lefay tired. I thought he was Sunderland's best player in the first half by quite a distance. I thought he struggled to impact the second half. And I would have maybe considered bringing Aushish on earlier. That's definitely something I would have looked at doing, although, I'm always, hindsight's an easy thing. But yeah, that is a sub. I do agree to an extent that I would have made maybe considerably earlier in the half. you can understand why he wanted to keep Lafay on, because he's got that bit of magic in his boots, hasn't he? But I definitely think he's tired. Michael says, can see why Regis has tried to get Samed some minutes. I think the real issue we had was the lack of width, as Plymouth seemed quite happy to clog the middle, where I think any combination of centre midfielders would have struggled. It shows how much we miss Mundle, and maybe we should look at adding another wide player. I think that's a great observation, Michael. I do agree with you. I think that, I think especially because Sunderland's game is really sort of set up to get opposition, to get the ball to those wide players earlier. I definitely think yesterday, although I've said Lafay was Sunderland's best player in the first half, I definitely think they missed a Mundle and or a Watson, especially in the second half. I think that would have made a big difference. And I think your comment about looking at another wide player is really perceptive. I think it's definitely something that Sunderland will be considering, although we hope that Mundle and Watson will be back in the next couple of weeks. A few of you over on YouTube were asking about the January transfer window and what's happening to the strikers. So I'll just kind of put those both into one, if you like, and talk about it. We've spoken to Labrise quite a bit, and listen, I think everybody knows that they tried to sign Tom Cannon. He's a player that Labrise really, really likes. They were reluctant to spend the money that Sheffield United have in an upfront payment. I think they would have committed to a huge transfer fee, north of 10 million. If it was a loan that becomes a buy if Sunderland win promotion, Sheffield United were prepared to put that money up front. That would have been a huge financial risk in Sunderland's position without parachute payments. I think what they're looking at now is, although it wasn't Meyenda's best game off the bench yesterday, I think you've made an interesting point, Michael, because I think what they're thinking now is that, do we get another out-and-out number 9, or do we get a player who can operate in a few different positions and give us a bit more versatility, and also give us something a bit different from those wide areas when we're not entirely sure exactly how Mundle and Watson are going to recover from their injuries. So I think that is something they're considering, Michael. I think that what they would like is a player who can do a bit of everything in that final third. And the thing that Labrise has said to us as well when we've asked him about it is the main thing he wants is some more speed in behind. So he's not too fussed if it's a natural number 9, if it's a left winger who can play through the middle, whether it's a player who's a striker but can play off the left. And the main thing he wants is more speed in behind. And I think hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into what they're looking for. I don't know when that player will arrive. I think that search is still very much ongoing and time's ticking away, but hopefully it's something that Sunderland can get done, because I think they definitely need another player in that final third. Hopefully Paveda can be a little bit part of that puzzle, but I do think it's important Sunderland to recruit a little bit more. And the last question I've got was, so Chris says, does the affect the approach to transfers? In the last week of January, we still feel short of genuine game changes that can make an impact now. So yeah, obviously you've got Mundle and Watson to put into the mix over the next month, and Paveda as well, hopefully. But yes, Chris, I don't think it changes the approach, but I think it maybe underlines the fact that another forward player could make a big difference, and I think that's definitely something Sunderland will be looking at. And Joe of Sunderland says, can you give 4 points away at the bottom team and still be in the mix? Well, look, Sunderland are in the mix. They are. Anything can happen in the Championship. The team's still around each other, still got to play each other. So, Sunderland have definitely got an opportunity, but I do agree with you. As I said at the start of this video, I think this was 2 really important points that have been dropped. A lot of credit to Plymouth for the way they applied themselves, the way they responded to what they'd been through over the past week. Don't forget as well, Morgan Whittaker, their best player for a long period of time, sold to Middlesbrough the day before the game. So an impressive performance from them in the circumstances, but really, really disappointing from Sunderland perspective. They're definitely still in the race for the top 2, but this felt like a really big opportunity missed. So there we go. Thanks so much for sending all your questions and comments in. Hope you enjoyed the video. I will be back for sure after the Middlesbrough game, a week on Monday, but we may look at doing some transfer video before that, depending on how the week develops. So just keep your eyes peeled. As ever, stacks of content over on the Sunderland Deco website, which you can go and read, including Labrise's quotes on why he picked Samed in full as well, so that can give you a bit more insight. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.